It's Advent. It's nearly Christmas. A special time of year, full of hopes and memories. One of the highlights of the church Advent season is the service of 9 lessons and carols. As the name suggests, we hear 9 lessons or Bible readings and 9 carols as we use them to follow the story of Christmas. And as joyful as the service is, it can become overly familiar, especially as we don't really have the time or the space in the service to look beyond the surface of the familiar readings. In these 9 reflections over the next 3 weeks, on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday, ending on Christmas morning, we'll discover together, we will delve beneath the surface of the readings and hopefully rediscover the depth and the richness of them. And in doing so, our understanding may be enhanced, and we might well encounter and experience this profound story of Christmas in a new way. So come with me as we begin with our first reading. And it comes from Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 to 19. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid." And God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." And the Lord God said to the woman, "What have you done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Well, Advent, a time of waiting, a time of anticipation, looking forward to Christmas Day, the nativity scenes, the presents, and the dinner, the arrival of God's Son. And we know the story. But what are we doing reading about Adam and Eve and God in the Garden of Eden? What's that got to do with Christmas? And what's all this about curses and snakes, enmity, crushing heads and striking heels? Have we got our stories mixed up somehow? No. For the garden is where the story of Christmas really begins. To understand what I mean, we have to ask the question, why Christmas? What makes it necessary for God's Son to come to earth, born in a stable? Well, as we've just heard, it starts here in Genesis with an act of disobedience and rebellion. Adam and Eve were given the whole garden to live in and care for, except for one tree and the fruit upon it. That they were told to stay away from. They didn't, and they took, or rather they stole, the fruit and ate it. And in that moment, with that act of disobedience, their beautiful, pure, wonderful life finished. Their lives and their hearts were tainted with something we now call sin. They were now different. Somehow they were soiled, dirty, not just on the outside, but right in the centre of their very being, what we today call our hearts. In time, they found that they were enslaved to sin. They couldn't stop disobeying. They couldn't stop rebelling against God. And it wasn't just them. The whole of the beautiful creation that they had lived in had changed also. Things still grew in the soil, but with difficulty. And rather than just tending the garden, they had to work at it with the sweat of their brow. Yes, things in the soil grew, but with difficulty and effort. The soil was tainted just as they were, and weeds and thistles took the place of flowers and fruit. Adam and Eve's life of purity now felt like a battleground. Everything was effort. Even the relationship between them was damaged. It was a disaster, a moment of thoughtlessness that changed everything. The deceiving serpent that had duped Eve and ruined perfection and made Adam, Eve, and all their children and their descendants slaves to sin. Something had to be done. God made a plan. Like any good parent, he didn't want to see his children live in the consequence of their disastrous mistake forever. But any plan that would reverse the effects of their disobedience and rebellion would only be successful at great cost. Who could pay to buy back enslaved humanity from the enslaving serpent, the one that we now call the devil, Satan? Humanity didn't have the wherewithal to get rid of the mess it had got itself into. Humanity could not work the debt off, work themselves free, nor did humanity have the resources to buy itself out of the slavery it now found itself in. The release had to come from outside, and the cost had to be paid in full for humanity's freedom. God's plan was to pay the price himself, for no one else could. And Jesus agreed with the plan. So Jesus, God's Son, came to pay the price of humanity's freedom upon the cross. As Adam and Eve's disobedience had affected all of their lives, and indeed all of creation, Jesus had to pay with all of his life to redeem them, to free them from the slavery of sin, to buy them back from the slave master that was Satan. Jesus did this by taking all of humanity's sin upon himself and dying upon the cross. And of course we know that as being the Easter story. And as he died, the power of sin died with him. Humanity was able to be free. Jesus rose again. Satan's power was broken. Jesus' heel had crushed Satan's head. Jesus was bruised, but Satan was broken, just as God promised in Genesis. But that is getting a little ahead of ourselves. For all that to happen, Jesus had first to be born. And that is Christmas. That is Advent. God's Son, destined to be a liberating king, was born in a humble stable, human child of human parents, conceived by God the Father, fully human, fully divine. And this is the first step in the final phase of God's plan to bring freedom to the enslaved descendants of Adam. It culminates at Easter upon a cross. But before then, there is the Christmas story. And the Christmas story itself starts with disobedience, then the consequences, then a promise, then birth in a manger, then death, finally bringing freedom. So let's begin to look at that wondrous story between Genesis and Christmas over the next few sessions when we meet again. And until then, in the meantime, God be with you.